Oh man. No. No. Badass. Always a badass. Okay. So, we're going to have to do all that shit again. All right. It's Dan Cohen in the pre-show. About 30 minutes of pre-show, give or take. I didn't measure. So since it's just us pre-shovians, I'm going to go ahead and share this on the Facebooks. Yeah, baby. The Cinnamon Girl. The Cinnamon Girl. You know what? Actually, I was thinking about something, though. I really was mulling over something, right? That song Judith from A Perfect Circle. You might hear me playing Dice Wars in the background because it's a pre-show. I'll do what the hell I want. Might crack some cans, too, while I'm at it. Non-alcoholic beverages for this guy. Gotta stay sober to sound so crazy. That board sucks and I shouldn't hit play. And you can't even see it, which is even cooler. So you don't know. I'm just losing. I was thinking about that song Judith from A Perfect Circle. Fuck that board. Fuck that board. Fuck that board. This is the funnest kind of stream because you can't see what I'm playing. It's Dice Wars. Good game. It's like Risk, but with dice. So I was thinking about that song A Perfect Circle, right? You got fucking Maynard. Those little.
Can you hear me?
I can now. Holy shit.
Sorry.
No, it's on my end. And yeah, damn. I was just going over my thoughts of A Perfect Circle.
Yeah, in retrospect, I don't think Tool's that great. Or Maynard was like some genius or whatever.
I don't think he realizes. I think he is smart, but like he's definitely like smart for a very run of the mill average person.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense, but like anything where people are like think about like all the time signatures they have or whatever is like that's like the number one point people make about Tool songs, and I'm like, well, it's not new. That wasn't new then either.
No.
And like it wasn't even new to like heavier music.
No.
It's Tool is what a dumb person thinks smart music is like.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's not like there isn't like an emotionality to it that isn't like
That doesn't
meaningful.
resonate. Yeah.
Well, like I think like the emotionality that comes with it, you can find it in other music, but like the main thing that people criticize about progressive rock music and metal in general is that it's not emotional. And the idea is supposed to be, well, Tool is emotional and it's got the time signatures, but I don't know.
And it's got the gimmick. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't actually think it's that unique of a combination of things necessarily.
Well, you know what I was mulling over was like you've heard the song Judith before, right? It's not like you
Judas.
killed. No, Judith. It's not like you killed someone. Not like
I
he
don't.
drove the
I don't think
hateful
I've.
spear. Really?
I'm not sure if I've heard that one. I
From A
I need
Perfect
to hear it.
Circle? It was like
I don't
their
know his
big
work in A
song.
Perfect Circle. I only know Tool.
Oh, wow. Damn, dude.
I don't know A Perfect Circle that well.
Oh shit. Okay, so this is all new to you, right? So like the song is supposed to be like this guy who's aggrieved with God, but it's also tied to like this Nansen new atheism movement, right? And there's
Hmm.
the more I kind of mull it over, like these, Tool, like okay, Maynard James Keenan was definitely like kind of riding that new atheism waves, like, oh, people are ready to hear this. And then he proceeds like to write one of the most religious songs I've ever heard in my life. Right? And like that's the
Uh-huh.
big one that people are like, yeah, fuck God. Like, because the more I mull it over, right, those lyrics that like, it's not like you drove the spiteful spear into his side. Talk to Jesus Christ if you want to know the reason why. Like your life
Hmm.
sucks. Like you can't be an atheist and make that. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
You can
No.
pretend that you don't believe in God, but if you're directly like, if you're sitting around mulling over why your life is so shitty and your blame is that God is somehow punishing you for shit that you're not even responsible for, that's not an atheist position. That's
Yeah,
quite,
I hear what you're saying.
you
I mean,
know.
it definitely sounds like he's more like mad at God for the fact that like he isn't real. That's
Right.
what it sounds like, and I don't know.
Well, it's like,
It sounds like you are like contending with something like greater than that, and you
look,
can't like get past the fact that you are spiritual, even though you think you're a based atheist or whatever.
yeah, go look up the lyrics for Judith because it's like, oh, so many ways for me to tell you how your dogma has abandoned you or your savior has abandoned you. Well, if your savior abandoned you, right? The logic problem there is you really can't be an atheist because you believe there was a savior who could abandon you.
Mm-hmm.
And like that sense of aggrievement, I don't think there's much like Tool would have very much in the '90s pretended itself to be like this kind of left wing rock music, right? Maynard James Keenan really wasn't too secretive about
Mm-hmm.
that, and I think in his mind he still is, but like that's probably the most conservative position ever because like that song could easily go like, Rabbi, why does God punish me? Maybe he prefers all you suffering. Did you ever think that maybe you should unfuck your attitude and not be so demanding on God? Like that song could easily go that way, and it's basically the same song.
No, I mean it's just he's got the ideology of the Art Deco stuff,
Yeah,
except he's just upset about it and frustrated and angsty about it. But it's the
yeah.
same thing in
It,
many ways.
like entirely. Like not even just in like a couple of like really poignant ways. Like yeah, it's basically it. Like it's supposed to be this Nansen atheism that's like, oh, I'm questioning God, but like when you question God in that specific manner, you reaffirm your own belief system,
Mhm.
whether or not you realize you are doing it.
No, imagine like being like one of the fucking zooted people who made all the Art Deco architecture, but like being sad,
Yes,
like ultra depressed about
absolutely.
it, which really is, I mean, more of a mark on you, just like being a spoiled brat at the end of history, which he was. He was all of those things, so it makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know. I would loathe to call him a spoiled brat because it's more than just the spoiled brats who have this weird kind of like obsession with God screwing them over. Like what he's mad about is surprise, surprise, spoiler alert. Most of the time when people are mad at X, they're mad at capitalism. And he's the kind of guy
Yeah.
who knows just enough to be dangerous because he would be like, "No, I'm mad at capitalism for other reasons, but religion has failed
Well,
on these
it's like
ones."
all this stuff with Squid Game, and I want to note that I have not seen it, but the thing that like I always find fascinating is like people are like, this thing is anti-capitalist,
It is.
and then the right wingers. Now I haven't seen it. I'm not. This is. I'm talking about like a more meta discussion of it. I haven't seen it. I can't fucking tell you if it is or not.
It
But
is. I haven't seen it either. I can tell you right away if the song, or excuse me, if the show's entirely about people playing these morbid games for rich people's entertainment to get out of debt, it's about capitalism.
but the problem
You
is that.
can't literally be more capitalistic.
But here's the point. Here's my point at least. So like, and then people will be like, well, no, it's actually anti-communist. Like then
Nope.
it becomes that, and they just fucking go back and forth about that subject, and it's really fucking stupid. Here's my point.
Well,
Like,
you know what? Actually, you know why they reduce it to that? Because they can't confront, like they don't want you questioning the horrors of capitalism. They're somehow invested, even if it's just their feelings. You can't be mad at God. You're mad at something else. No, I can be very easily mad at God. You know,
here's the
I can
thing
be
I would
very
say though.
angry at capitalism. It's very easy to
It's
be.
people who are on the left who are like, this piece of media is anti-capitalist.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, if the piece of work in itself doesn't have a lot more to say than we live in a society, and like that's frustrating or whatever, then yes, technically it has anti-capitalist messages because a lot of what you find frustrating in modern life would be a result of that. But at the same time, don't fucking oversell it. And I'm not saying that maybe Squid Games really is like very explicitly about that, but don't give out the accolades just for like the bare minimum, because by that measure, like Seinfeld is anti-capitalist. When George was like, "We live in a society" or whatever, then it's the same fucking thing,
Yeah.
and you've like completely flattened any sort of message into just being good bad, right?
Right.
And I don't think that's like useful in
Well,
like any serious capacity, you know.
also, I'm going to point this out. This came from Ashley Frowley, but the sentiment, not only do I wholeheartedly agree and endorse, but it's
Mm-hmm.
correct. Objectively, scientifically
Mm-hmm.
correct. Um, if you need a show about people getting shot in the face to teach you capitalism is bad, like just looking outside isn't sufficient, or just thinking about your own shitty life is insufficient, like,
Mm-hmm.
do you actually think capitalism is bad?
Mm-hmm.
Do you really? I question your commitment, because if you have to like run to like this hyper violence, it's, to me it comes off more as like, um the masses themselves, right? They're actually okay with it all, which is mortifying, but it's the truth. They're fine. They're okay. They don't like this one specific thing. They don't like the debt. They're fine with it, and no amount of shooting people in the face is going to change that. So these gunshot dramas, which I have said before she did, but these gunshot dramas where everything is moved along by shooting somebody in the face, and that's how you convey everything. That's the only way you can conceive of art or expression, is by a gunshot to the face. Like, they kind of sicken the shit out of me, and they're bad. So, like, Squid Game, like, that's my radical stance. Squid Game is absolutely anti-capitalist. It's also shit. How do you like that one, dude?
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I just I basically agree with what you're saying, but what I would say more generally about this stuff is like, don't hand out the accolades for nothing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, or at least don't fucking like post about it being like. Here's the thing about it: unless there really is some sort of undercurrent in it that's worth examining, don't fucking hand out the accolades and post about it. Now you can say it like interpersonally to people or whatever, but if you post about it, you're just doing their fucking work for them, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're just doing advertisement for them and making them money at that point.
Right.
And if they're doing the bare minimum to get you to post about how it's actually this instead of that, like, I don't know, there just seems to be something perverse about that on some level.
The capitalism is winning then. They're doing a brutally effective capitalism while selling the anti-capitalist message. It's the same thing as Starbucks and the coffee that Zizek always brings up.
Yeah, it's all in one. It's a one-stop shop for your fucking emotions, essentially.
Yeah, you can sell the anti-capitalism tied to the product, so you can just keep doing the capitalism, but now you feel good about it. All your guilt. This is my point about guilt, right? This is my point about guilt. You can feel guilty,
Mm-hmm.
and you can also feel like a morally good person because you know you're supposed to be guilty, so you can just keep being bad. You don't actually have to change. You don't actually have to be a good person. You can just feel like a good person because you can assuage your guilt through the fact that, well, I know that Squid Games is anti-capitalist, so these savage pigs who don't, and they are savage pigs, right? Because they're like, no, all the murder's good. That's good. That's a good thing, though, and that's a communism, right?
Mm-hmm.
so you are morally superior to the savage pigs. The counterpoint is that like you're morally superior only to savage pigs. You haven't done anything. You're not useful to the left movement. You are still a hindrance to the left. Like, and that's just because you prefer to perversely feed your own guilt instead of doing something, right? And there's not too many leftists who can claim that they don't have that inherent filthy sloth inside of them, at least credibly,
No, I basically agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this is my other thing about don't give people the fucking don't say don't fight about things that are actually like pretty inconsequential, because I don't think it's really worth your time or effort to be engaged with. And the stuff with critical race theory that I've been seeing, that I think there are aspects of this debate, or at least this situation, that I think it focused on a lot and are probably not the things worth focusing on. Because as far as I see it, what this is really is a move to attempt to bust teachers' unions in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a move against public education overall. It's trying to, get people to stop paying taxes on these things so that, or, ameliorate people so that, like, when they finally pull the rug out under you for public schools, you'll be okay with it. Because one of the things that they'll get to do is, as climate change happens, you'll see, I think, what happened in New Orleans happen in many places in the country, which is all of these old public school buildings that desperately needed to be upgraded or fixed or destroyed in the natural disaster. And when it comes time to rebuild them, the school district decides, you know what, they're going to all be charter schools. We're not even going to rebuild these things. And right now, if you go to New Orleans, you can't send your kid to public school. There aren't any. You can send them to school for free, but they're all charter schools. And I think that's the long-term goal. And any actual consternation about what's being taught is secondary to an economic goal that exists. Because, of course, all of these, school board meetings, while many of the people are there organically to fucking rant about how I don't want my kid learning about John Brown or whatever, while a lot of people are there organically, a good deal of the actual debate is being astroturfed, and many of the people there are astroturfed people.
Yeah.
So the thing about that is the actual focus of, like, what do you teach your kids about the history specifically or not, is really just focused on kids who are going to absorb and learn anything. And my point generally is, if the kid is going to absorb and learn anything, they're probably going to turn out liberal by default because they're probably going to go to college. But it's still a, like, battle for the soul of, like, well-off white kids. Like, that's all that, like, this whole fucking debate is on the surface, at least.
Right.
And even the liberals who participate in it are doing the same thing. As long as they're super focused on making sure that, like, the kids are reading the good books, you're fighting the same fucking fight that they're fighting.
Right.
Which I think is funny on some level. And I've told the anecdote where, like, I helped hand out the summer reading books when I was in high school, when I was a senior, and all the kids immediately threw it in the trash. And I never got to the end conclusion of that, which is that the only kids who are going to fucking read those books anyway are kids who can be reached by that sort of material. And that poor kids are probably going to think the same thing regardless.
Yeah.
Which is that any of those topics are completely alienating to them anyway. So I don't know. That's that I've said my piece about it. I'm curious what you think about the situation generally.
With the CRT?
Yeah.
Well, I would be inclined to agree with you. I think this is a lot of astroturfed bullshit. And that at the cultural level, are you a liberal racist who has to hide it or an overt bigot, right? I think
Mhm.
playing that game honestly does evade the big question. There's a lot of people who, echo that sentiment that we shouldn't be playing so many race games, and it's not really because like
Mhm.
it's not because we believe we live in some kind of colorblind society or that somehow like not fighting racism is quote unquote morally good or ethically
Mhm.
good or so on. It's a matter of like you're you're wasting a lot of superfluous energy trying to negotiate between which type of racism you're willing to stomach in society.
Hmm. Yeah.
So by burning off a lot of excess energy and frustration at which type of racism is quote unquote good, actually,
Mhm.
you deflect from exactly what you described, the socioeconomic issues at
Mhm.
play, which is the goal to privatize education finally and put the nail in the teachers union and so on.
Mhm.
Put the nail in the
And
coffin.
and I do want to point this out. I haven't fully been don't give kids letter grades pilled. I haven't been fully pilled on that yet. But I've thought a lot. I've thought a lot about it recently, and it's been something that's been churning through my mind as somebody who comes from a background of having been in the honors classes as a kid and in college even. Um, and the thing that I find the most interesting about this whole thing is there's all these debates about what books the kids are going to read or whatever. And the liberals are all about getting the kids to read the good books, despite the fact that like most of them can't be fucking reached by that anyway. And the kids that are going to be reached by it are going to be fine regardless. But still,
Let me ask you this, and I want you to be.
uh,
I'm not being facetious, but what is the Like, did you see the list of books that fucking right winger wanted to ban?
I've seen a similar list in a particular district in Pennsylvania, but the final point that I wanted to make here is just that.
Well,
Y- y- y-
let me just throw this out here to
Mhm.
chew on real quick, right? What
Mhm.
what do you think a book on Black Lives Matter can teach a black student that they don't already fucking know because of the harsh realities of life in our shit society?
That's a good point. It is. I guess it really is for the white kids, isn't it?
Yeah, if you
Um,
look at this list of books, they're all books that are meant to get white kids to empathize with non-whites. And the problem there is ultimately like instead of burning off energy fighting actual racism and possibly winning substantive battles, we're just arguing about whether or not spoiled rich kids ought to be empathetic to non-whites, which obviously they should, but that bypasses the problem of actually doing something substantive for victimized non-whites.
right. And the thing I was going to say is, all these liberals, they want to get the kids to read the fucking Secret Life of Bees or whatever, and whatever the book is. And yet they still want their kids to like get letter grades, right?
Yeah,
And have that be like life or death fucking deterministic for how their life is going to turn out. And or not life or death, but it's going to significantly determine their livelihood. So at the same time that you are trying to get these kids to learn, or sorry, you're trying to teach these kids that being racist is bad, you're like giving them grades about how much they absorb the material, but those grades are like deterministic of the futures of all of these black kids that they're supposed to be then purportedly like empathizing with.
right.
Um, and the grades themselves really imbue an ideology to these kids that is greater than anything that the books could ever imbue to these kids, right?
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I do find so funny about that. And again, I haven't been fully fucking don't give kids metrics killed, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah, I'm against eliminating metrics if that makes sense, but the mode of metric right now is um, woefully under par. I mean, simply put, like we have to have some sort of referential evaluation tool to decide who can be a doctor and who should not be a doctor, right? You're going to be
mhm.
hard pressed for me to believe that any random jackass should be a doctor. I shouldn't, and if I'm as arrogant as I am, and I believe it is not in society's best interest to let me be a doctor, there is merit to gatekeeping on who can be a doctor. Now, the mode we use right now is entirely used to stab at poor kids and disadvantaged kids, especially non-white kids, in the form of the letter grading scale and how we arrive at that scale and the context under which they arrive at that scale. Because of course that's your letter grade evaluation in a society founded on racism and rape. So you're going to perform better the more racist and rapey you are, either really by hook or by crook, you know. So those metric systems need to go because we need to have those underlying problems taken care of. By the way, hey Jenk.
What up?
Hey John. By the way, I didn't say hello to you. I'm sorry.
It's all good. Yeah, I do think that there's nuance beyond what's being presented right now as being the debate, which is just like up or down, yes or no, should the history of the United States be taught in like X, Y, or Z permutations. And my answer to that is that if that is your debate, and like, okay, so I'm not somebody who thinks that, like, how do I put this? Shit. It's
I get what
it has merit, but
if
yeah, it has merit,
slavery, then people will know how bad whites are. We'll have white genocide. I know what you're getting at.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. I misread the room. My bad. Wrong podcast.
No, it's more that like I do think that like these history should be taught in these ways, but that like you're just fighting their fight on their terms at a certain point, which is not like particularly useful, and B, it's funny that these conservatives are going to these meetings and getting really mad about this kind of thing because no matter how much they fight against it, they can never it's like invisible food in front of them. They can never be satiated. It'll never actually result in the thing that they want.
Right.
And it can't. It kind of by definition can't result in the thing that they want, because ultimately they're both hypocrites on some level, or at least stupid, because ultimately the conservative is stuck in a situation where their kids are still getting grades and can never fight against the fact that a system based on meritocracy will on some level have integration no matter how much you like it or don't. Whereas the liberals, they are fighting this thing about how, no, we need to teach kids the good history or whatever, the correct history, but are completely reinforcing all of the forces that resulted in that history by still having everything be based on metrics and meritocracy. And I think that I mean, it's just funny they're fighting on those terms, I think.
What's up?
No, you're a meritocracy.
What's up, Michael Jordan Peterson?
What
Is
up?
it in the bedroom, hon?
What up, Dan Cohen?
We're killing the pre-show with the fun talk.
The fun talk, okay.
Yeah. So we're talking about the battle over CRT and how it's just useless capitalist propaganda in order to ultimately privatize schools and put the nail in the coffin on racism once for all. It's won, game's over. Yeah. Fun stuff.
Let's just whitewash history again. Yeah, that's cool.
Well, you know, again, if you go through CRT and you just simply present it as the negative, no, it's bad actually, right? Like, what changes? The social structures don't change. The underlying premises to society don't actually shift. And where'd we end up? What did we get out of it? What did we get out of this giant fight that is just draining energy left and right?
You don't get nothing, but it was never really a fight. It was just a thing, and then like the right started fighting it, and then the left started fighting for it, and it's like, what are you doing? Like, you don't have to fight for it.
Yeah.
You can literally
It's
just
literally just teaching history.
just rename a new theory get it to do the same thing.
It's no longer critical race theory. It is now
It is now
Critical.
Hotep
historic blackness in America.
Yeah.
It's called Black Power Magic, Super Magic.
Called the new Black Panther Party studies.
I'll tell
At
you what,
all.
kids, hold the fort and do some filler. I gotta go get something.
Actual history.
And you can start the show, but remember, we're doing free will tonight, and I'm just gonna be a dick and take over. So fair warning.
So just the show.
Uh-huh.
He really shouldn't set himself up like that. It's a little too easy.
Yeah,
You should be a part of the squad.
Most of what I was saying earlier was just that, like, the liberals who are fighting over this are fighting in a situation where, yeah, you teach the quote unquote correct history, but the only kids who are reading it and absorbing it are basically their rich white kids.
Right, and the kids who were never going to have a problem with reading and absorbing it in the first place.
And then you're giving them fucking grades, and those grades reinforce all of the history you just taught, like materially onto the less fortunate kids, which I think is ironic and funny that they're consternating so much about it.
Oh, we should just call colonization cake time.
We
should call it genocide.
Well, listen, we went to India. We had a lot of cake. The Indians really liked the cake.
Mm-hmm. Oh wait,
then
North American or India? Oh,
it doesn't matter.
So many options.
It doesn't matter.
Got to get some strawberry in there too. some yellow cake.
That's uranium.
Right.
You know you love yellow cake.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
We've gotten ourselves banned, by the way, Dan, by talking about how to build a nuclear bomb.
Who got banned when?
I assume we did.
When?
We can't possibly be on the air after all the things that the Michael Jordan Peterson
we
said.
did one too many Hitlers.
When did you talk about building a nuclear bomb?
Just now.
He said the word yellow. He said the word yellow cake too many times.
Yeah.
And then
you got a 5 allotment for yellow cake.
I've warned you.
Yellow cake.
Here, I'll help. Centrifuge. There we go. I did it.
Percentiles.
Yep. So anyway, they were doing yellow cakes in India, and
well, boys, I'm disappointed, but I can't say I'm surprised.
You left us alone. What did you think? I ended up burning my mouth on the stove.
Where do libertarians sit on, like, fucking, like, if you can refine uranium?
Oh,
they've got to be just like
they sit on child abuse.
They sit on if
they
it's
sit
under
on
the age of 15, it's still legal because it's hemophilia.
Please use the correct words.
Yeah, use the correct words. Just because you can refine uranium, is it over 15 years old? Because if it is, it's legal, and I don't want it. That's where the libertarians.
I don't even think uranium can last that long.
It's a really old substance. Enriched uranium? I don't know. I don't enrich uranium a lot, so.
Yeah, that's not something any of us actually do. So
you gotta put it in a pot and cook it.
Yeah, I just listened to that song by Fundamental.
What was that song? Gotta do the cooking by the books. There it is.
Yeah.
Ah, there it is.
You've never heard Fundamental, have you?
Fundamental? No, I have not.
Oh, Fundamental is I think he's an Iranian rapper, and he just raps about how to build like dirty nuclear bombs and shit.
Oh, that's good. That's
good.
That's a great concept.
Yeah,
that is actually a really funny concept.
10, top troll.
Yeah, he's boss as shit.
That's straight trigger. Just triggered him.
Nah, Fundamental rocks. All right, so free will and thought problems. I'm gonna open this one up for debate, unlike last time. Should I go over where we are, what we've done so far?
Yeah, go for it. Just briefly.
Just a brief
monad.
Monad, singular unit 1. Problems with free will in the monad. The laws of physics. You can't travel too far, can't travel too fast. You can only travel at set rates. You're limited horizontally, you're limited laterally. You're limited chronologically. Things you do in the past can dramatically affect your future without your control once you're in the future, right? Once you've aged. You can be limited by your own psychic situation. That is your mental health. That is the ideology rattling around in your brain. And you can be limited, of course, by what we call physical impairment, right? The monad's body can be impaired in some way. This is the notion of disability. That's what that expresses. If you have a dyad, you have multiple people and you gain an advantage, but you also have disadvantages. The advantages to the dyad, of course, are shared labor power. You can't share labor with just one. With multiple, i.e. the dyad, you can share your labor or combine your labor. But now you have the problem of communication. You have to be able to speak and communicate. If not speak, you have to be able to convey thoughts to the other pair of the dyad. The more complex the communication, the more opportunity for miscommunication, which can cause social conflict at that level, right? The level of 2, the interpersonal conflict. When we move to the myriad, that is the many, we have all the limitations as previously. Any individual member or multiple individual members may suffer from disability, dis-ease, right? And we now have to communicate among many, not just one. The psychic conditions thereof may change the meaning of that communication. Okay, so as you layer these things, but in the multitude, in the masses, we gain the ability to accomplish even more, exponentially more than we had with just the social interaction of 2. Right? Easy enough to understand. If there's 2 people, you can get so much done, but if there's 30 people, you can get a shit ton more done. 2 people can over time build a house. 30 people can build, a multi-story living complex. They can build shopping malls. They can build huge things. And if you extrapolate that out to 7 billion people, you have a shit ton of potentials for miscommunication. And all of these can impact what any individual can do. This is the notion of free will, right? Agency and direction of thought into action. So that's kind of where we're at. So, now I always offer the alternative interpretation. It's not so much free will, it's bodies with organs. But let's stick on free will tonight, right? We briefly touched on that last time as a notion of ethics, which is where I think free will leads directly. And this is, of course, liberal notions of free will. Religious notions of free will are different. They are either predeterministic or deterministic. Predeterminism means everything's fated. Determinism means nothing really matters. It's all happening chaotically. Okay? Easy enough?
Okay.
All right. So let's start thinking it through. What kind of problems can we reasonably run into, right? Let's say, for the sake of argument, we have, 1,000 different little monads bumping into each other in one geographic location. And for the sake of argument, let's talk about an event, a mass gathering where these little monads are bumping into each other. And one of those little monads is deemed to have social hierarchical power that has been thrust onto them. And that person demands blood.
I knew it.
You knew it. You knew
Fucking
where this
monad.
was going.
Don't blame me. I voted for Kodos.
I voted for a different monad.
That's right.
And let's say that happened sometime in about January of this year, right? Let's really start stress testing.
January Schmenieth.
January Schmith, yeah. Let's start stress testing this notion of free will. What do we think about the people who stormed that building?
The monads?
That little coest thing of monads, the myriad that stormed that building. What do we think about them? Because they're the other, right? We presume they're the other. We weren't there. We were watching on the news with bated breath to see if they'd get papowed.
I don't like it.
You don't like it. Why?
I mean,
Because
they're.
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, they were like basically a bunch of restaurant owners and like small business owners that did that, and that generally speaking, when people of that economic strata perform a revolution of some variety, it's usually shitty.
Okay. So when the capitalist class revolts, it gets bad for workers, we can say. Now, let's talk about the free will aspect, not necessarily whether we like it, historical, whatever, right? Let's talk about the free will aspect of it. When they hear one monad tell them that he's going to march with them and take them down to the Capitol steps and go seize control of the government in perpetuity for the outgoing monad leader, okay? And they commit to a course of action on that premise, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the free will implications of that? If we say, for example, they did not act of their own volition, let's absolve them of acting of their own volition, right? For the sake of argument, let's say they didn't act of their own volition. They acted the will of this higher monad, right? They've given their will to him, or their will has been taken from them, fed to this monad, and this monad is now exercising its individual will over the great mass. What does that say about the liberal notions of free will?
Certainly throws them for a bit of a tizzy.
You think
That
why?
It doesn't apply to colonizing?
How are you making that jump?
I don't know.
Don't just guess. I mean,
Well, the liberal
Okay.
view of free will is that those monads do still have an active
I
free
just felt like
will.
there's
If you're
something
removing it,
problematic
then
there.
it no longer has free will.
Okay.
If they're acting at the behest of the other monad if we're removing the element of free will, you cannot ask how it affects free will. It's gone.
All right. So let's scrutinize. Let's scrutinize then a term that comes up in this context. Let's scrutinize propaganda, right? What is propaganda?
If you take away all the bad things from a good thing, then all that's left is the good thing. Yeah, sure. Like,
Well,
propaganda is the way that the monad influences other monads.
All right. Well, what is the act of propagandizing? What is that? Right.
Well, my understanding was
You're pushing your
propaganda.
will on others.
Well, my understanding of propaganda was that it was that the propaganda has to come from the government, and otherwise it's just misinformation. So,
right.
or how do I put it? If it doesn't come from the government, it's sparkling misinformation. that was a bad champagne.
Champagne region of France.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's.
All right, so the act of propagandizing is specifically the government spreading disinformation. All right, so we're going to use a hyper-specific definition. So to scrutinize that a little bit further, right? How can somebody who's not employed by the government engage in propaganda? Can they do it?
Or if it's at the behest of a government.
What if it's not at the behest of the government? What if you just like the government and you engage in it?
You mean like how Facebook does?
Then I think technically it's sparkling misinformation.
Okay.
Now, I mean, you can really nitpick here at a certain point because, like, I don't know, like when there's monopoly power on like an extreme level and they produce media of a variety, like, isn't that really like coming close to propaganda? And I don't know, it like does technically, but I think a narrow definition of propaganda is fine.
Well, let's stress test it then, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm 58 years old. I've spent the past, so what does that put me at? Born in the 60s? Yeah, right there about, roughly?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm born in the 60s. In my lifetime, I've watched my father lose his job. I've lost real wage growth until I accrued capital to secure a business, right? And all the while, I've been suspicious of institutions because the older I get, the more institutions have been revealed to have been engaged in some truly heinous shit. All the CIA experimentation, all the CIA violence, U.S. government sanctioned violence, U.S. government engaged in, violence the U.S. government has engaged in, etc. Right? But all the while, I'm told that we're supposed to trust institutions. Somebody comes along and provides a counter narrative that may not be quote unquote factually accurate, within the measurements, knowing full well that what is considered factually accurate is coming from the same government who engages in what we call propaganda, right?
Mhm.
So I have two narratives. I have competing narratives, and I select the narrative that goes against the government narrative. Okay. Have I been propagandized or have I been incentivized into not believing the quote unquote media or quote unquote government narrative? Is what they're doing propaganda, or is what they're doing is trying to come up with alternative explanations for existence, right? Because propaganda, I think, is a pretty loaded term politically. Certainly, what we're engaging in would constitute propaganda by opposing sources, right?
Ooh,
Sure.
I'm propagandizing.
That's what they would allege.
That is what they would say.
That is what they would say. So, am I doing that? Because I'm certainly not pro-government in this instance. I wasn't pro-government in the last instance. Any pro-government leanings I've had fell apart after I got fucked over by Obama, right? And they certainly weren't going to be validated by Trump. So, if this is an act of propaganda, right, a new narrative, a competing narrative against these other narratives that exist, propaganda then doesn't really sound like some sort of nefarious act. It sounds like marketing and advertising, right?
Sure.
It's fair to say. I mean, that's what they do. Obviously, they're trying to sell a narrative that may not be true. But if we use a very strict sense of propaganda is some sort of negative influence from the government's position on it, then it's sparkling misinformation, as you called it. But ultimately, they're trying they are, certainly the makers of that narrative are trying to offer me something, right?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't think that this difference is huge fundamentally, is it?
You don't. Okay.
If we call it sparkling propaganda or propaganda, I don't think it makes a significant difference.
Well, what about advertising? What if we stop calling it propaganda for a moment and start using the word that we were using in non-political context, which is advertising?
Sure.
Okay, so you're okay with it. All right.
Yeah, I mean, it's sales.
No, I think
it's all
the narrow
sales.
definition. Yeah, I think the definition matters.
Does it?
For historical context, yeah.
What's the
I think
difference?
so.
If I try to sell you a low-fat, low-carb shake that will definitely make you lose weight and make your dick harder, is that all that different than Trump's narrative that the election was rigged or the Biden narrative that everything was fine? Is that really, on superficially, is that all that different?
I think the skill set isn't different. I think the goal is.
What's the difference in the goal?
Well, usually one is directed toward a political project that isn't inherently about finance, but I guess is more explicitly about power and the exercise of power, as opposed to finance, which is, like the shake that, makes you lose weight or whatever. That's about generating money.
That's about generating money.
Yeah.
All right, do we accept the claim that Trump was in government for the purpose of enriching himself?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I think that it's a little bit more complicated than that. Maybe like his ego or like emotional problems he had. Like, I don't think he just thought he was going to make tons of money by doing it. Like that alone was the reason he did it. But at the same time, like, yeah, you can definitely make that claim, and it's not like I don't think
you're far off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so then what's really the difference? If the attempt is to enrich themselves in a position of unassailable power versus enriching yourself in a position of unassailable power, what's the actual difference? That's what I'm trying to drive at here, because and you go, why is Dan playing these semantics games?
The intent matters.
But the intent is the same.
Because whenever I'm trying to convince someone that rather than buying the 100,000-mile SUV that's going to break apart on them in 2 months, they should probably consider a small economical sedan. That goal is relevant to me, and it's relevant to the people that I'm trying to convince. And it's way more relevant than just accepting the fact that one may make me more money than the other. You know what I mean? Like, that target goal should have meaning, and that intent beneath that does have purpose.
Okay, but that would be more an argument for Trump being no different than any other salesman.
I
I
mean,
don't
you
think
can.
you've caught me. I don't think he's very different than any other salesman.
You
Okay,
don't.
so the thing about that situation that I think is unique is that Trump both owns a company that is 100% brand driven on who he is and was president.
Okay.
I would also make the argument he was definitely doing propaganda because he was the head of state, so he was the government.
I suppose I don't like. I want to point this out. I don't disagree that he was doing propaganda. What I'm more driving at is there actually any kind of meaningful difference between just routine advertising or propaganda?
Yes, intent matters.
But the intent is in this case exactly the same, right? And the intent of the Democrats, they're honestly, it's the same. The goal is to secure the powers that be to enrich their donors. So enrichment is the name of the game in all of these things. What's the fucking difference is what I'm asking. In either scenario,
Well, because
in
there you can use that sales power for good. Like whenever the CDC is putting out advertisements trying to encourage people to get fucking vaccinated, that is also advertising. That is also propaganda. They're trying to do it for a positive purpose in theory.
Well, the problem with pushing the vaccines over anything else is literally the government deciding which companies in the healthcare industry make money and how. In this case, these vaccine manufacturers who've rushed and been awarded millions upon millions and free IP and then want to sell the vaccine, right? That was Bill Gates' purpose for pushing vaccines, at least. It was to make sure that these drug manufacturers would make billions hand over fist selling it across the world, that they had monopolies.
I don't think it's being pressed because the drug manufacturers make money. I think it's being pressed because for the long-term sake of the country, it's better for the health to have the vaccine out.
Honestly, though, it's the outcome for the
Why would they
nation
do
state.
it? Why would they do it so lazily if they actually really wanted it?
Yeah, they could just force it. They have an army. They could just force it.
They literally could have forced it at any point.
Yeah.
They literally could force it at any point.
And it really doesn't make much of a difference for the nation state if you purge off, honestly, the stupidest members of society. If you purge them off, and you might catch a few geniuses along the way, whatever, it happens. But it really doesn't make any difference because what you're going to be left with is a vaccinated populace one way or the other.
I do think it makes a difference.
I don't. I honestly
Yeah,
don't.
I definitely think it makes a difference.
Yeah, but they concluded a long time ago that soft power was a much better game to be playing. I mean, you could make the argument that they'd be more effective at hard power, but I don't actually think that's true because I think that if hard power was more effective, they probably would have been doing it in the first place. So
no, I think they know it's effective and it's scary effective, and they just don't want to do it because it's to themselves.
It's to their own class, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Or certainly the class of voters they are making an appeal to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the premise to all of this bullshit ultimately is they're all making appeals to the exact same set of voters, the ones who march to that Capitol and threaten to hang government officials. Right? So what we call propaganda, now Cenk touched on something, what Cenk is labeling as propaganda versus advertising as quote-unquote moral intent. Is advertising moral?
Well, I said I didn't think there was a functional difference between the two.
No, but that was the appeal you
I think the
made.
moral intent does matter.
Does it? Because what is moral about profit acquisition at the cost of somebody else?
Yeah, they backfill morals. They say
You
like,
sell
we
things.
gotta invade them.
You sell things all the time.
They might
So?
have
It
weapons
It doesn't
that
always
we don't
have to be profit driven.
Okay,
They
yeah.
WMD it.
Yeah, the WMDs, that was certainly advertising. That was certainly propaganda. It was certainly immoral.
Sure,
There was
and
a lot of people dying.
Whenever you first met your wife's family and you really wanted them to like you, that was also sales and advertising. You're advertising yourself. You're trying to sell yourself.
If we're making a moral difference, though, when I sell these things to people and it might cost them their houses, me marrying my wife didn't cost her family anything.
Well,
Yeah,
not
so
your particular
I wasn't-
instance, but like, you know what I mean.
My sales pitch didn't involve acquiring
No, I don't
capital.
know what you mean.
Yeah, and I don't think that it was a particularly evil sales pitch either.
Right, but
This may shock you,
you touched
but I
on
don't think
something.
you're a bad person.
you touched on something though. We're talking about the morality of a sales pitch. You touched on something. It was, we do this all the time. If I just walked around shooting people all the time, it would not make it any more moral. And the argument, the exact same argument comes up. So I don't think morality has anything to do with it.
I walked around curing illnesses, it would also not make it any less moral. Like, morality is not tied to the sales pitch.
Morality is not tied to repetition. The argument you made was morality is tied to repetition. I don't think it's not. I don't think morality has anything to do with repetition. Just walking around curing diseases all the time wouldn't actually make.
How did I say that? How did I argue that the morality was tied to the repetition?
When you said, "Well, we do it all the time." Well,
yes, we do it all the time.
Yes, we do it all the time. That's an appeal to repetition for morality.
No.
Yeah.
So whenever I said we do it, hang on, let me clarify my statement.
That was the statement. There's nothing to clarify.
Let me clarify my statement. Whenever I said we do it all the time, it wasn't an appeal to morality in the sense of we do it all the time and therefore it's okay. What I'm saying is there are more instances than the ones that you described in which we are selling things. That's what I meant by we do it all the time.
Oh, well, then you shouldn't have said it then. Because when you say it in response to a moral question, that's your moral answer. Like
I apologize for cutting in when I could.
Well, you should be. See, there again, you're wrong. You should be apologizing for the fact that you're just haphazardly throwing things out there instead of making.
Well, the good news is I'm being fairly blasé about it, but it was sarcasm. So, I take it back. I don't apologize.
Good. Don't apologize for that. Apologize for your haphazard behavior.
I apologize for nothing. Suffer.
I'm not suffering. I'm not the one who looks like a dumbass saying that just repetition is somehow evidence of moral immorality.
That's not what I said, and you repeating it does not make it what I said.
Well, it is what you said. It's not what you meant to say, but it is what you said.
You can repeat it all you want. It doesn't make it what I said.
It does make it what you said. Riding the tape back. Oh, look, here's Dan. Does the fact that we do it make it moral or immoral, or sales immoral? Well, we do it all the time. Oh, the tape. Oh, the tape. Ah, man.
Mm-hmm.
Anywho, moving on. No, what I'm driving at here, and John, if you have a counter argument, throw it. But what I'm trying to demonstrate here is what Trump was doing, what Biden was doing, what the media was doing, what random people on the street who are loosely politically affiliated were doing. Right? They're all messaging.
Mm-hmm.
They're all communicating a certain scope of ideas. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're quick. The liberals at least. We're very quick to just condemn it as, oh, look, they've been brainwashed, they've been propagandized, right? Which brings up a lot of questions about free will.
Yeah,
were they actually, quote unquote, propagandized? So what is the act of propaganda? Well, that's just advertising. We're all being propagandized to all the time.
Well, I do think that a lot of what the liberals were, I don't get the impression that what the liberals were trying to get across was that the people who did it were brainwashed. I get the impression that they were trying to frame them as evil, which would imply that they did have free will. And I don't think that they're evil necessarily. I think that it's actually.
To be fair, the liberals love contradictions, right? What do they try to do? These evil, brainwashed people. Well, that's one hell of a set of contradictions, which I thank you for bringing that up.
Mm-hmm.
Because
I have a lot. I have a lot more empathy for that group of people than I think what liberals said that they had, or said that they were like motivated from.
Honestly, that part. Because we're talking about free will implications, right? So the problem is evil, brainwashed people ultimately, right? They've been propagandized to. They've been convinced of this.
Yeah,
right?
It's very funny that they're evil and they're brainwashed.
Yeah,
I don't understand how you can come to those conclusions.
I get to bust out.
Well, because they believe that it's an implicit of free will, so they've chosen to be brainwashed, right?
That's
that was the evil act.
If you believe in material analysis, then I think that the conclusion that you come to is not necessarily that they've been brainwashed, but that they're like the natural conclusion of the system that they didn't really have a say in, right? So, does that mean that they were brainwashed? If you squint your eyes and tilt your head, you could make that claim, but it obfuscates the fact that the thing that poisoned their brain wasn't like the fact that they were on Facebook too much. Like that's not. I don't think that that's like why they showed up there. And I think
Oh,
putting it that and framing it that way is bad. I think it's better to frame it as like when you give people very little choice in how they participate in politics, broadly construed, then like it's going to drive them nuts. And the people that are driven the most nuts are the people who are presumed to have the most autonomy, even though they don't. So, yeah, I mean, I think that has a lot more to do with it than like, I don't know, they just like read the bad Facebook posts or
let's
whatever.
let's go ahead and let's pick right now. What do you think? Who votes evil and who votes brainwashed?
Evil.
You say
If
evil.
I had to like,
If you forced me to choose one, I would choose evil.
You're gonna choose evil. Okay.
if you forced me to choose that dichotomy, I would say brainwashed, but like
You were gonna say
nuanced.
brainwashed. I like this. All right, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna default to brainwashed, to make a nice contentious split. So we have to explore it. Okay.
Mhm.
Spoiler alert: we were gonna do that anyway.
Mhm.
Oh, enjoy me exerting my delicious free will.
Some good propaganda right there.
That's
Mhm.
it. Not so much propaganda. I'm very good at advertising.
Mhm.
No,
So,
propaganda is when he insists you said something you didn't say. It's him trying to sell the audience.
motherfucker, again, it's a video that's being recorded and will be replayable on the internet. I will send you the clip.
Watch here, I'll back it up. I, Dr. Dan Cohen, agree with Javier.
Ha! You added yourself.
Ah, well.
Ah, fuckles.
There's only like 5 of me in the country.
That's true. Actually, there's a lot of you now. The border's porous.
Take that, bitch.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How do you like that one?
Yeah.
Snuck in a jab. Got it.
Anyway.
Anywho.
You tricky Spaniards.
So, let's take the brainwashed case, right?
Sure.
The notion of the brainwashing, ultimately, when you boil it down, is that you're being bombarded on all sides by advertising. And that means something very bad for the people who like to throw around the allegation of brainwashing, right?
Mhm.
In that relationship of monads, the dyad, right?
Does it like freeze them from any excuse? Okay, no, I'll let you.
I
You're
don't.
getting there. You're very close, because what has happened? They view life as a competition. In a brainwashing scenario, the ultimate competition has taken place, the battle of wills. Your free will has been compromised and absorbed by the other, to the point where you become a puppet of the other, hence brainwashing, right? You have been controlled. Your mind has been controlled. If your mind's controlled, the body's controlled. If your body's controlled, your resources are controlled. If your resources are controlled, there's nothing you about you. You are a tabula rasa that has been filled with this evil paradigm, right? This nefarious external force has prodded around in your brain. But then we have a problem, because they're going to demand the prosecution of these people. And if they believe they're brainwashed, these little tiny tabula rasa puppets.
And it's always the white ones, right? They're the
Right.
brainwashed ones.
Yeah, in that funny. If you take that narrative, then why aren't they prosecuting their shoes? Why aren't they prosecuting random objects that have been utilized in the act of the crime? Why aren't we charging their coats? Why aren't we charging their hats? Why aren't we charging their signs? Because if you can be brainwashed, you can be entirely manipulated by another's will, then you're just an object. You've been objectified in the most literal sense. Objects are inanimate things, right? The water bottle I'm holding up, I'm not showing the label, but this water bottle has no will of its own. We all agree on that. But if your brain can be washed to be controlled, then you're not different than this water bottle in any meaningful sense.
Here's what I would say to this, which is, if you were talking about the need to separate them from society, so that they can't do this kind of thing again, I would agree that that's the case. That would be good.
Well,
And that doesn't necessarily
that's
speak.
sidestepping the question. Are they evil or brainwashed?
No. But here's the thing. I think that generally speaking, the universe, I wouldn't say it's deterministic, but materialist analysis has a lot of elements of saying that things are deterministic. But the problem is that because we're humans, our perception of what's going to happen is flawed. And that makes things not deterministic to begin with. So there's wiggle room there. And what I would say, here's what I would say. I would say, the question is, do they need to be separated from society, and they need to be reintegrated when they're not when their brain isn't poisoned? Then yes. And if that means punishment and using the justice system, etc., I would agree with that, which is basically what the people who say that they're evil want as a consequence, right? So right. There is that. But here's the other thing. I think that what happened was a result of systems a lot larger than just bad people reading posts on Facebook. And it was probably always going to result in that, which is why I see them more as an outcome of larger systems than I do as a bunch of people being mean. So that's the nuance that I have, which is that consequentially, I guess I believe in very similar things to people who would say that they're evil, but I think that there's more at work than just bad people reading things on the Facebook or whatever.
That kind of still evades it though, and it's still the brainwashing problem. The brainwashing problem still exists, right? Because ultimately, it's an argument for brainwashing. These massive systems have impressed inside of their heads and made it impossible, right? And again, you reduce them to an object. You have to objectify a person to say that their will has been shredded and they are a puppet to be utilized, right?
I'm not afraid of doing that on a mass scale. Because the fact of the matter is that at this point you're examining every single person who was there as an individual, and that analysis is flawed, and you have to have a fucking poisoned brain to have that analysis to begin with anyway, which is part of what this is. This is part of why we're talking about this.
There you go. You're getting there. Honest to God, you're getting there, right? You're getting to what I'm getting at. Because if your opinion is those people's wills have been impressed, number one, right? How do you know your own will hasn't been fucking shredded, and that's why you're mouthpiecing what you're mouthpiecing? Number two, if these individuals, this myriad of people, right? If they've been brainwashed and they've been just expunged of their will and everything, the process ought to be to restore their will or to simply use them as tools for a different purpose. The problem there is the reveal is that you're butthurt you lost the competition to take their will from them. That's what you're mad about. You weren't the ones robbing their will and putting your own brainwashing on. You were unsuccessful.
This is an interesting flip of the idea that
you're just a loser.
Yeah, this is an interesting flip of the idea that conservatives are just afraid that liberals are going to do to them what they've been doing to other people.
It's actually liberals who were very much afeared of it.
In this case, yeah,
they're very much
which is funny. Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's an interesting way of putting that. Yeah,
that is ultimately what that expresses. It expresses the idea that your will is something that can be manipulated in the same way, possibly already has been. You are an object. These other objects acted against that, and you are having a Pavlovian reaction, or a lesser reaction, just a biochemical reaction to it, that you've designated them as evil and you as good, an arbitrary moral distinction, right? So these evil brainwashed people, you really don't have a claim to incarcerate them because, of course, again, the water bottle doesn't have morality. It doesn't make decisions. The object once robbed of free will is just a biochemical machine. It's no different than a gun or a bat or a road or a car. It's an inert object waiting to be utilized. So you can't incarcerate any of them. Maybe the ringleaders, the quote-unquote ringleaders, but even that's suspect. That just shows they're the most fervent adherents, the most willing to annihilate their own self-identity to be a part of this larger identity. Remember, I touched on this. Fascism has a collectivist ideology, right? And if these are fascists, This is what we expect to see. But then we run into a problem. How can we hold any individual fascist accountable for their actions? Because they're devoid of any free will. They're just subservient to the master will of the God King. In this case, that fat, doughy freak. That's a problem, isn't it? That's a pretty big fucking problem. Maybe we don't want to end there. But what's the contrary position? Right? If we take
I mean, as a counterpoint, you did found this on a by choice question that we all felt was an unfair way to phrase it. But sure, the alternative to the
I don't
second
think
Well, I
anybody
mean,
else thinks
this
it's
is
unfair. These are the two liberal narratives. If you have a problem with the framing, you take it up with the fucking DNC.
yeah. I was gonna say this is
I was
like
with evil
if
the whole
you
time.
Yeah.
yeah this is
Oh, go ahead, John.
no. I was just gonna say this is like these are the only conclusions if your brain has been poisoned by this stuff to begin with, which is ironic. No, I
Yeah.
mean, which is ironic given that like this is explicitly about brain poisoning.
Right.
So yeah, that's
These are the armies of wine moms who decided that Joe Biden was our last best alternative. You take it up with them if you don't like this framing. We're merely examining.
I
the
don't like the
implications.
framing. You're right, and I don't know any immediate wine moms to take it up with, but I'll make sure to in the future.
Yeah, you go get the DNC's customer service number, fella. We're just examining their proposed analysis of the situation with the lens of free will in play. By actually, hey guys,
They would argue they're
I'm
just a
sipping
corporation,
ivermectin
right?
for the brainworms. Good. Chug that shit. Welcome back, chat. All right. So, the brainwashing narrative comes with a whole host of problems that are really fucking uncomfortable and really deride a lot of that liberal free thinking nonsense bullshit they purport, right?
mhm.
Because it shows, unfortunately, in crafting that narrative, what they accept is they have already given away their will. To even begin to recognize something that is devoid of will, you too must be devoid of your own free will. You must have given it up and capitulated. What's the
Walk around
counter?
talking about their slaves. Ugh.
What's that?
They would walk around talking about their slaves. Ugh.
Yeah. Well, to be a master and a slave in the dialectic, the master actually is still bound by a lot of systems that make him a master. So unfortunately, his evil is systemic, and that's part of the brainwashing problem. Once you're in that position, your brain is poisoned. You're now brain poisoned to be a master. It comes with more material benefits, but it's ultimately the other side of the same problem, right? The system itself is all fucked up. That's how you can have the opportunity for a class trader, frankly. And yes, I'm going to chew on stream again. I've been a good boy today. Only like 8. All right, so let's take the evil, right? If they are evil, if we can say at their core that all their decisions are going to produce evil in the world, what we have is a problem of standpoint epistemology, don't we? And how that dances around free will. Because if they're evil and they're good, if we, as the outside external observers, say they're evil, we make a moral designation of their existence. The decisions they're going to make, the existence that they hold, and the will they exert around them is an evil object, an evil thing in the world, right? We run into the problem because they see you, if you were in their shoes, thinking their thoughts with their material conditions, through their eyes, out their mouths, into their peers. You are the evil thing. You are evil and they are good. Because good and evil is reduced to a binary. We're going to reduce, chat, we're going to reduce good and evil to a combination of desirable and less harmful, and evil as undesirable and more harmful. If that helps. We're going to shorthand good and evil into those two loose contexts, okay? If we're going to make that moral assertion that they're evil and their decisions are evil, then by the same token, they're going to flip that script and you are evil. And that means within the myriad, right? The idea of the in-group and out-group are permanent features. They are not malleable, they are permanent fixtures. And where you fall is a matter of observation, right? The in-group for one is the out-group for the other, and vice versa. And that means there is a type of competition in play, but it goes beyond mere economic competition. Not only does it have an economic component, not only does it have a political component, it has a social component, it has a moral component, it has a spiritual component. And it ultimately drives at the heart of the very meanings of existence then, right? Your free will, as compared to somebody else within the myriad, may be so uncompatible that there is almost a survival conflict in play, right? We end up having to adopt a Hobbesian worldview. It is a war of all against all. And the best you can hope for is finding other people like you, glomming on, and exterminating the rest. And if we hold that worldview, what have we done justified?
Genocide.
So that's an unacceptable answer. But the problem with liberal free will is when we start examining these in actual context, right, what problems arise? We have the problems of genocide and eradication, right? Those could come from liberal conclusions of free will. We have the problem of objectification, which is the opening for racism. If you can see another person as an object, you don't have to give a shit about their existence. You can be bigoted against it. You can hate it, and it doesn't matter. You're not hating another person, right? It produces the problem of the war of all against all and eradicates social contracts. You don't need to uphold social contracts with people you absolutely despise, or worse, who are inherently so different from you that their existence is an affront to you. You don't have to hold any social contracts to them. Social cohesion erodes. All on the premise of free will alone. When you start extrapolating free will and what that really means in the liberal notion, you end up with some really horrific shit as the only viable conclusions to free will. Because no matter what you think your morals are, the negation is simultaneously true and good to your opposition. And that creates an unresolvable conflict without the introduction of violence. And we see that introduction of violence throughout liberal history, don't we? It's how it was born.
They love their violence.
They love their violence. How they built their economies.
They love their violence and make it look like they're not violent.
Right. Well, they paint it as something necessary. It's a clean violence, right?
Rebranding.
That's how they overcome that contradiction. Smart bombs. The guillotine was originally introduced as a clean alternative to just taking swords to the king's throat and hacking them up with axes. No, the guillotine's nice and clean. See, it cuts the head off. It's real fast. There's a little blood spurt. It's all over.
It's instant.
So
they
are
won't feel any
drones.
pain.
Targeted strikes, right?
Targeted
Precision
strikes.
strikes. My fault.
We don't execute people by cutting their heads off or strangling them anymore. That's barbaric. How we do is we put a little needle in their arm, put them to sleep, and let them fall over, right? What do we do with surplus pets? What do we do with pets in pain? Just go. What do you do with a fetus that you don't want? You suck it on out and call it a day. Right? All those things. These are very clean procedures designed to minimize the graphicness of the violence, but still underpin a violent solution. Right? That's where we end up. And conservatives and liberals then end up on two different ends of the same exact binary. Right? They end up putting themselves on a good and evil binary. I'm good, they're evil. And calling it a day. But the contradictions are still there, and those contradictions produce violent conflict. They don't have a means to negotiate the problem of free will as they propose it because of the contradictory opinions that underpin their thought and start at that point. Locke proposes a social contract. Locke proposes a social contract between peers with all humanity as peers while he's selling slaves. Right? That's his pitch. That's his big pitch to fight Hobbes. No. It's fine. We don't have to have a war all against all. We can all negotiate amongst ourselves. Now, here's some people for sale, by the way, out back.
True story.
Yeah. Goddamn liberal indeed. The problem is we use these terms liberal and conservative. We use these terms right and left the way they're currently proposed, such that the liberal falls on the left and moves on, and the conservatives on the right and we move on, and we use a big dividing line with those two at basically the center, and then everything else extrapolates out from there, right? And we do that. That's starting the fundamental point we start from, which is what has been driving me mad for weeks, is that notion of free will, that bedrock. What is a human being? It's an agent. It is a thing with free will. Well, what the fuck is free will anyway? And when we start applying these to situations, we produce really horrific outcomes, or massively contradictory thoughts you're supposed to hold in your head, and then liberals sit and wonder, oh, I wonder how all these people are fucking insane. Well, the problem is you're insane too. The root of the problem is everybody's insane thanks to this system, and then we're left trying to figure out what this fucking mental illness is. Yeah, you know that. They don't. They live with the contradiction rolling around in their head, and it drives you fucking nuts to talk to them because they are not... I don't see the world the way I want to see it, right? With all the shit ripped out of my brain. But I am right now going through the process of trying to rip this shit out of my skull and see the world for what it is. We're at least making an effort. Some more than others. Jank.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You built an entire argument off of a flawed original paradigm, and then it doesn't really check out in my brain if you want to keep building off of it.
Yeah, oh, you're making a moral distinction. Well, we repeat it all the time.
Hang on, let's rewind the tape again. Ignore the fact that you don't agree with this premise. If you agree with this premise, which of these two things do you agree with?
I said
it's literally. Hang on. Let's rewind the tape.
Let's rewind the tape.
Ignore the fact that this premise you disagree with. Which of these two premises do you not agree with?
The problem
Cohen.
with you, the problem I always have.
Also, my name's Dan Cohen.
The problem with you is you always have to lie. I repeat what you said, and you get pissed off. I repeat what you said.
I repeat what you said.
You have to lie to me. I said if you had to pick, would you say they were evil or brainwashed?
That's not what you said. You said ignoring the fact that this is not, that you don't agree with this. Disregard that you don't agree. Which is it? Are they evil or brainwashed?
I said that to John, thank you, number one. Number two, when I started the question, it was...
So you agree it was said.
What do you think? I want you to vote right now. Ignore your hard opinions. Evil or brainwashed? If you had to pick one, which would you pick?
None of us thought it was either one of those answers.
You know what the fun purpose was? The purpose was to get the discussion rolling. So I threw a little survey.
I mean, it is, in fairness, it's all for you, America.
It is all for you. That's why we fight. This is more or less how we fight about magic cards, by the way.
It's true.
Actually, there was a pretty famous fight. It's not really famous because it happened between the two of us, but I consider it famous in my head because I'm delusional.
I've already forgotten it, I'm sure.
You haven't. We were arguing about. I had said, I build commander decks, right? When I build commander decks, sometimes I like building fun creature batch decks, and I just love Woolly Thoktar. And what came flying out of your mouth was, why in the fuck would you play that in EDH? Why the fuck wouldn't you play something that wins? To which I retorted with, well, if I want to fucking win, I'm busting out Doomsday and Thassa's Oracle. If I want to have fun, I'm busting out Woolly Thoktar. To which you
love
said,
me a Thoktar.
I love me a good boy.
He's a good boy.
He's a good boy. He's a fun boy. It's fun. When you want to have fun, you play with the Woolly Thoktar. You want to make money, bitch, you better get yourself an LED and a fucking Infernal Tutor and a Demonic Tutor and an Imperial Seal. You better go for fucking blood.
Why would you want one good boy when you can have a lot?
Well, I mean, the presumption, right? The presumption is that in that deck with the Woolly Thoktar, there's going to be more good boys.
Yeah. Clearly, you're building 100.
I want as many people as possible. That's all I want. That's been my pathology in that game forever.
So you're gonna play red, white, black John Locke's deck, right?
That's what I always do.
I mean, a bunch of slices.
I like. Well, no, in those colors you can still make a lot of. Yeah, okay. In those colors you can still make a lot of tokens. Yes. So whatever.
That's what I said. That's why you play red, white, black, or green, white, black, where you can just shit tokens. So supposing that, sorry for the diversion from free will. So supposing that evil is a matter of observation under material conditions, isn't brainwash something similar, i.e. Chud's calling weirdos like us brainwashed? It's the reverse is also true. If you accept brainwashing as a premise, what you accept is that a human being is no functionally different than this here computer controller. You accept that they're nothing different, and that wills can be imposed upon them as some sort of negative energy field that pervades their brain and can rewrite the base programming. Even if you believe they're inherently good, frankly, if you believe in an absolute good and they're inherently good, they can be rewritten in much the same way that the coding on this can be changed so that X hits a different button on screen. They can be remapped. They can be overridden. That base goodness can be overridden. And in that kind of scenario, the problem number one is, how do you know you haven't been brainwashed, right? You have the simulation theory problem. Number two, if you accept that you've been brainwashed into thinking this is good, then good and evil don't really matter, because what they're doing, they've been brainwashed into thinking is good. And it means all of you are devoid of any human agency. Without agency, you can't have responsibility or consequences. And you dick trip into determinism and scientism, which means none of this shit really matters. So when in the example we used, these assholes charged the Capitol and killed people, that's irrelevant. You're angry at them or demanding for justice because you don't like them. It's not about the fact that people died. There are human beings who were on this earth and now aren't as a result of those actions. Those consequences don't actually matter, but for coding within the brainwashing. And that's a horrific application of the notion of free will, that our agency and our ability to act, ultimately our humanity, matters. That completely is an affront to it. Hence why the Sons of Trier more or less want to eradicate the notions of liberalism. I think we've all, at this point, committed pretty hard to that. Would you say, boys?
Yeah. Just me?
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I think moving beyond it's important.
Yeah.
It's not it's not the only horizon of thought. Though what actually comes after, it's pretty hard to envision at this point.
Well, if we haven't even thought ourselves out of liberalism yet, so our thoughts aren't poisoned by liberalism, we can't think our way out of it, can we? And we can't act upon those thoughts. That's the real trick to it, right? If you wanted to get really technical about my criticisms of anarchism, anarchism is just liberalism. If you wanted to get critical about my thoughts about communism, past practices of communism have been specifically executed to get bourgeoisie revolutions with slightly different outcomes. They have been 100% successful. The problem is, it's still liberalism. It's still, at its core, bourgeoisie capitalism. That's a problem. That's not human advancement. That's trying to wiggle your way out of it while still keeping it. That's trying to give up the teddy bear and saying, I'll only hug it sometimes. No, motherfucker, time to give it up. That's what the goddamn Russians did. That's what the Chinese turned to out of desperation. That's where we're at. That's the world we live in. There is no non-capitalist country, ultimately. They're political communists, but we're not getting socialism anytime fucking soon unless we think our way out of this shit. And the clock is ticking. You know.
The doom clock.
The doom clock is ticking, so we have to start somewhere. Why not start at the fucking beginning? The premise of free will as opposed to the monarchy, right? Let's start there. That's where they make their big claim. We give you freedom, which is the ability to express your free will. So let's start scrutinizing that. Good as place as any. That's what's driving me insane. How do we come up with a new notion of free will? How do we get our own? What's the socialist version of free will? That's where I'm at. And first, we're going to have to pick apart this carcass, right? Sorry.
Yeah, these are hard. No, it's just these are hard questions to answer because, like as people say, we're Homo economicus, and it's hard to really envision anything else.
It is.
So what does that look like? Because I think that the common problem that I always talk about with the two strains of leftist thought that are the two branches.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes,
it's determinism. When they eschewed predeterminism, they fell dick first into determinism and haven't left.
Yeah. So the two main branches of leftist thought are anarchism and communism, and both have flaws that I think are difficult to contend with because, and I'm going to say this very broadly. You can yell at me later. It's just a broad summary. The problem that people have with communist thought is, they tell you their system and how it's going to be planned out perfectly, and then you're like, yeah, but are you going to like force people to work? And then they say yes, or they don't say yes. They like are coy about it, and they're like, well, we're going to have like weird incentive structures, or I think the tankies would just be like, yeah, we are going to just fucking point guns at people and make them work. And people don't sit right with that. I know that was broad. You can give me the wall.
They're forced to work already anyway.
I know there is a problem with that, and there's a lot of equivocating that happens at that point. But generally speaking, they would tell you, yeah, we're gonna force people to work. And then with anarchists, it's actually a very similar problem to libertarians, which is you're like, yeah, but like, what about children? And then their brains explode because they can't answer a basic question about like how fucking not fucking, excuse me. They can't answer basic questions about for the libertarians, yeah. But anarchists can't answer basic questions about like where any imposition of how a kid acts like can meet with any amount of responsibility or whatever. And yeah, I mean both of those are like pretty fundamental flaws that exist within them. But in many ways, liberalism has like
the worst of both.
Yeah, I was going to say like liberal in many ways the sort of liberal solution to those picks a lot of the worst elements of them and is like, well, this is the only way, and I don't know. I don't think that that's like great either, because with the forced work stuff, what they'll tell you is with the forced work stuff, they'll be like, we don't force people to work, and we don't point guns at people to work, but we just kill them slower, which that's not a great answer. And the stuff with child agency, well, for the anarchists, they tell them, yeah, your child's like, basically your property, and you can tell them whatever. And like, yeah, we're going to also like impose state things upon you so that like you're behaving yourself and you're not, I don't know, beating your kid to make sure they go to bed on time or whatever. But also all of like the structures that like would make a person turn to sex work, like that's also there on children who are less fortunate. And hey, we're not like forcing them at gunpoint to do sex work, but we're
going to leave that door open for them to choose it.
Yeah. So
well, that's it. The problem with anarchism, then, if we wanted to say it slightly differently, the problem with anarchism is that it does not contend with the idea of continuance or externality at all. It's not designed to. It fundamentally can't. It can't think of the next. As much as they pretend that that's what they're doing, it ultimately cannot think of the next, because that involves children, that involves future, that involves preparing children for a society of anarchism, which in the most extreme cases, like that fucking weirdo on Twitter, Anarchismus, right, literally can't fucking fathom. It's alien or hostile to their ideas, right? Just like a libertarian, the idea of the past and the future are hostile concepts. They only have the present. They have the exact opposite problem of liberalism, which wants eternalism, right? Communism has no fear of eternalism, but under all known structures, eternalism requires some level of cooperation and some level of coercion.
Yeah, I mean, this is like...
you put it in the very simplistic terms of we're going to force people to work. Work must be performed for things to continue on, for motion to occur, for the old to be moved beyond. And
I'll say this much, I hate to quote a video game, but I'm going to do it anyway because we're all gamers here. One of the most poignant things in Disco Elysium was this moment where I can't remember which character says it or like where it's said, but basically a lot of what draws me to Marxism is that it paints a stunningly accurate picture of why we're all fucked and then completely abandons you in terms of any actual solution. And I generally agree with that. The more and more that I've absorbed about these topics, the more and more I'm just convinced that anything that we think is praxis or we claim as praxis is like flailing in the darkness. And I'm not black pilled on this subject or anything, and I think there are a lot of reasons to hope, but yeah, that's been more of my my conclusions as of late. And I've definitely like moderated only out of the fact that I think that in terms of moving forward when you're in such a dark place,
Yeah.
you can't like fucking jump around and leap all over the place because you'll probably hurt yourself.
Well, that's
So
it. The problem, the critical problem is risk aversion, right? That's
mhm.
the issue. Without an external stressor on capitalism, to get out of it is going to require a heavy amount of risk that ultimately all the anti-capitalists, more or less universally at this point, are risk averse, right? You got to hold on to what
It's
little
hard.
you have.
It's hard not to be when they got nukes.
It's hard not to be when they got nukes. That is.
Yeah, name more than 5 ways that can go wrong.
No, well, I mean, I also think though that like it's more than just being risk averse in the sense that it's more than just being risk averse in that like, okay, well, if we just do like the October Revolution, we might die or whatever. I think that a lot of leftists have seen what has happened and the just, cascading defeats of the 20th century and come to the conclusion that like, is there any way to not get this stuff strangled in its cradle and to have it be a little bit longer lasting? And yeah, I mean, I think that like breeds a certain amount of
despair.
caution. But at the same time,
despair. Yeah, it's fatalistic.
At the same time, like a lot of the stuff that inspired being left wing in the past, at least in this country, has been like basically appropriated by Democrats on the social end of things.
Yes.
So that the stuff that might lead you to these conclusions is instead you're like not railroaded, but instead it just on ramps you to being a Democrat. And yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a large part of this too.
If you look at what those failures are, what are those two types of failures? One, they don't go far enough to eradicate capitalism. There's your problem with communism, right? They don't go far enough. You look at the American communist context for World War II, when we had a thriving communist party. They had an opportunity to lunge. They could have put more and more pressure and threatened the war effort, right, at the risk of fascism. If they're willing to risk fascism, i.e. failure to fascism, they could have won more substantive gains and survived, because they could have leveraged that directly against the business leaders who were already plotting to side with fascists and coup, precisely because of the communist elements that FDR managed to navigate and negotiate, right?
I thought, wait, are you talking about the business plot?
Yeah.
No, wasn't the business plot World War One?
No, that was FDR they were going to kill. That's World War II, Buckaroo.
Oh, okay. I was confused about that.
And notably, it was after the rise of Hitler, but before our entry into the war.
Okay, that's why I got confused about it. It wasn't mid-war.
No, it was after the New Deal legislation was passed, before it actually was effective, because of course we needed a boost to the economy, as represented by the external war with fascism and imperialism, right? That's when
Right.
that plot occurred. It was about 39 or 40 before our entry in Pearl Harbor. 41? Late 41, yeah. If you look at the European context, the Europeans routinely smashed their communist parties. If you look at the East Asian communist parties, most of them were smashed. The two that survived, the two biggest that survived, in the Far East, of course, the People's Republic of China, which has taken the deal with the devil with the idea that they can overcome Western capitalism on a more nationalistic ground. They're successful. They've won. That gambit paid off for them at the costs they were aware they were, paying. And of course, Yucca, right? The North Korean ideology, which survives as a parasitic state because of China. The next most successful East Asian Communist Party at this point is something like the Japanese Communist Party, which has the profession of teaching locked up to still get left ideas into the heads of children, so that they may not all turn into be little Shinzo Abe acolytes, and maybe they can't win, but a more tempered center-left party can. Now, that hasn't been true. They've been failing, and the hard right has been winning there. If you look at it, if you look at the South American context, and really from Mexico south, they have all sorts of successful communist movements that are then routinely squashed out by the imperialist power of the post-war United States. Cuba is a rare exception. And Cuba was off one, the luck of Cuba not looking like Haiti was essentially off the entire luck that JFK was not willing to send in the airstrikes and launch the war. And even they're sliding more and more towards...
Yeah, essentially him being petty, which is kind of funny, all things considered.
Yeah. If you look at Africa, their communist movements are routinely devoured alive by warlords, often backed by Chinese interests or most often Western European and American interests. What's the problem with anarchist movements? Routinely speaking, the calendar. The calendar is their greatest enemy because days progress. Every one of their major losses has started on one date, ended on another, and it's always been a very short run. They lose to time because they have no concept. To be an anarchist is to be devoid of a conception of time in the future. It's devoid of building, if you will. Because the anarchism of the book, when put into praxis, is in direct odds with the idea of an enduring anarchist society. So their greatest problem is just time ticking forward. They will erode naturally because they're not built to last. You see it in Spain, you see it in the Chaz, you see it anywhere. Outside of very, very small, the micro-anarchy, as Nozick would put it, or the macro-anarchy of nation-states and the micro-anarchy of the household. It cannot exist. And it's important to remember that even at that macro and micro scale, you're still up against the clock. Things will change within that context and ruin your slice of it at the very least, if you're not fucking careful. And don't try to assert authority within that structure. And it does come off as rather grim but true, as chat says. It is ultimately, I start with Zizek. If you want to know my entry into Marxism proper beyond reading the manifesto like every edgy fucking child, it's Zizek is my entry. And what he proposes that now is the time to think this shit through. So that's what we're going to do. Because that's the only plan we have.
Yeah, there is otherwise you're flailing in the dark.
Yeah.
So the only way to turn a light on is to think.
That's the only way. First, you got to think about where that switch is at.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been a big conclusion of that. And I don't fucking us jerking off on stream and talking about this stuff. If you want to if you want to do good work in your community, you can, but I wouldn't necessarily do it with the idea that you're going to like have anything be transformational.
You can and should. If you have the opportunity,
Eventually.
you should. But
you should do it. It's very unlikely to harm anything, unless like, yeah, I think it's very unlikely to harm anything if you're doing work in your community.
Just remember
Yeah.
that the great leaders were a product of a lot of different situations, not just about action. It's about a lot of action. So if you have a fantasy of being the next, Mal Lenin, I'm sorry, the odds are very,
Lenin.
very low. Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not, probably not going to be you. And that's okay. If your goal
Yeah.
is socialism, that's fine. The socialist, one of the big problems we have about talking with socialism, and by extension, one of the inherent problems of anarchism, is this great man bullshit anyway. Lenin and Mao are just dudes at the end of the day. They contributed, in my opinion, more positive than negative. We can learn from them, but we can't. We have to get away from that idolatry. It's like Marx the monolith. Marx was a man. He was just like any of us. He started thinking. The difference between Marx and us is we get to start at Marx. He had to start dealing with all that other bullshit in Hegel. We get to jump off from Karl. That's what he did for us. That's what influences
Kneeling up
our
that
free
ramp.
will. Yeah, that's right. We're going to try to roll upwards from there, and it's not an easy thing. So anyway, back to fucking free will, right? Back to the fun stuff.
Fucking free will every time.
It's the goddamn free will that'll get you. Really, I like that January 6th as kind of a closed case example, right? Because if you're MAGA, you're not here anyway. Fuck you. If you're a liberal or a leftist, that's a good illustration point. And honestly, where I fall on that particular subject, I do think those were free will. Those were actors with agency. And they expressed their free will. I think some of it was goaded on by the circumstance. But ultimately, they were predisposed to doing it. That's what's rattling around in their brains. Because when they evaluate
to cash out is free will, right?
What's that?
The attempt.
Yeah,
at
you got to
cashing
pick one
out
or the
is
other.
Free will.
Well, if I were to knee-jerk pick, I would pick evil too, fellas.
Okay.
Yeah, but if I were to properly express it, this notion of brainwashing is simply picking between the competing narratives, right? We're dealing with advertising. What has been advertised to them as when they were picking which one seems the most right to them, they picked that shitty one. So that's what's rolling around in their brains. That's the ideology that appealed most to them, right? Based on their material conditions, that's the ideology that matches. That's what they've changed their programming to, or that's what their programming has become. So when they're exercising their free will through that spiritual and psychic damage, that's what's coming out the other end. That they cannot overcome it is unfortunate. But I'm not one to think that the Auschwitz guard is devoid of responsibility for what he did. I think they knew goddamn well, or at least pretty quickly afterwards, they didn't quit. They knew where this was going. They wanted it. Now they have to be punished for their actions. However, I don't really want the liberals to be the ones putting them on trial. And specifically for the crime of essentially trying to purge that government for Trump. Because the conclusion thereof is, of course, a domestic coup, which means the democracy ended. The minute Mike Pence overrid his own president, that's it. Democracy's over. It's all a fucking game. It's all over. That veneer is over. We don't live in a democratic state anymore, no matter how badly people want to pretend American democracy exists. And it's not my fault other commentators don't want to acknowledge that. It is the responsibility of the elites for the destruction of democracy. As much as they'll pay lip service to that idea, the point has happened in America. That's over. That shit is done. And I can only speak from American context and firsthand experience. It's where I live. Is what it is. We talk a lot about American politics. That happens to be where we're from. That shit's over, kids. It was killed the minute Mike Pence said, send in the National Guard to break this shit up. Because that's a coup against the sitting president. His government, he was democratically elected within the rules of the game, which was undemocratic by its very nature. And that's what we got. They foiled a purge, they didn't foil a coup, and a coup was launched to stop the purge. And it was successful. And the blame for destroying democracy actually falls with the Republican Party when Mike Pence betrayed his president. That's a lot of shit to swallow. That's a lot of shit to swallow because it shows you a couple of things. One, it shows you how fucking bad things are in the Republican Party. They are locked in a civil war, and the establishment assholes without the backing of the military have lost, meaning we get the crazy cuckoo birds, you know, as we like to make fun of them, the evil people. They've won. Bad guys have won. And it means the Democrats are feckless and essentially not a useful party. That's not a party structure that has any fucking relevant use because they didn't do anything.
Oh no, the Democrats are feckless and don't have any functional use.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've ever heard that criticism of them. That's
I know. But it's not uselessness in the fact that they have political power and refuse to spend it. It means they have no political power. It goes beyond that. It means they have no political power, and expending a vote for them is wasting any shot at political power you have in the current framework of the system. And without a revolutionary party or a revolutionary contest going on, voting for them means you have no political power. You're just resigning yourself to squandering it. And we're at a stage where essentially we have to let that, this is the hardest part, I think, we have to let that die. We have to let that rot away on the vine, the veneer of it. Because we're going to need a new party. We're going to need a workers' party. And that workers' party is going to be made out of people who may not be entirely enjoyable to be around. But we're going to have to do it, and that's the way things are going to have to grow. We're going to have to form a new coalition and coalesce around a new political party, because that organ is dead. It is just a money sink only. There is no political power to be gained there. I don't know if that's the Greens. I don't know if that's the, God help me, the Libertarians. I don't know what it is. But
No way.
Something new has to be co-opted or something new has to be created. If you're going to get the veneer of democracy back, because right now there is no contest. It is either a vote for having no political power, as demonstrated by the Biden administration, or it's a vote for these fucking awful brain-wormed freaks who, by the way, in a socialist society, it's not like you really let them run around saying this shit. You would do things to impede them and their leadership because they're bad for socialism. They are at the other side of that conflict, no matter what. So the marriage of leftists to liberals for this purpose is one of sheer convenience only to punish the right. But the leftists who go, no, that was good actually, that's not a leftist anymore. That's somebody who's siding with the fascists as if somehow they're going to be able to convert the fascists to being good guys. That is an insane, absurd delusion. And running cover for them is the worst fucking decision you can be making. Letting the right fight it out with itself, have at it, Haas. Who cares? They have the political power anyway. Let them have a contest between them. No matter what the outcome is, it's not good, but they might kill each other along the way. That's more useful to me than them being alive. Gulags aren't that bad, my dudes. Listen, if you mean that, I've been saying it, brother. If you mean that, chat, I don't disagree. What else you gonna do with him? You gotta kill him or you gotta gulag him. You can't let them run around being fascists. That's a hard fucking pill to swallow. You're gonna have to violate their free will because what they use their free will for fucking sucks. And this gets to one of my favorite points. It's okay, actually, to stop a rapist from being a rapist. You can violate their free will all day. I can tell you this. Matt would not let all these pedophiles run around the internet. That's for goddamn sure. They're gonna fucking... What are they... Did you guys see that one where they're gonna kill that fucking mayor from North China for taking bribes?
What? Oh yeah, they do this sometimes.
Yeah.
Didn't they they forgave him of the death penalty or whatever, or like someone pardoned him or whatever? They're not actually going to put the guy to death. They sentenced him to death, but they're not going to actually kill him, I think.
Yeah, what they did is they sentenced him to death, but they are allowing him to serve a different sentence in lieu of death.
So they pardoned him from death then.
They didn't pardon him because he's technically speaking, his punishment is still considered the death penalty, but in lieu of actually executing him, they're enacting a different punishment.
I feel like if you don't kill the person you sentenced to death, you've given them a different punishment.
Well, the threat is, of course, in Mexico they
well,
kill.
Maybe they think it's more productive to do something else. You know.
They could be making.
We just like needlessly killing people here.
Yeah, but like, it's I don't know.
Could be life in prison. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, like, then just say that the punishment is life in prison. Like
the point, the point, the reason.
I mean, isn't it a death sentence though? Death by life in prison.
I guess actually that's a fairly strong argument. I'll take that.
Yeah, they're just not immediately. They're not satisfying the violent end of it. Like here, we would just go, oh yeah, let's kill you. Liberals actually
maybe make them pay for his mistakes. Actually maybe rehabilitate him or something. I don't know.
Well, they're not going to rehabilitate a guy who stole $100 million functionally.
No, that's true.
Yeah, you're not going to do that. That's in that guy's brain. He's got the brain.
I'm just saying there's options.
It's only 100 million. That's like chump change in America.
Screlly stole less, and they vilified the shit out of that guy. Even though it's chump change for an American billionaire, it's the act. It's the fact that you took them. It's the fact in the Chinese case, it's the fact
you made the other rich people look bad.
Well, part of it is you make rich people look bad. Part of it is, from the Chinese ideological standpoint, is something along the lines of you violate people's trust in the party. The PRC has merged a lot of this shit into one organization. The party is where you go for moral and ethical questions. It's where you go for social and political questions. It's where you go for economic questions. So for them, this guy taking bribes violates all those ideological things, and you can absolutely frame it as it rips the veneer off the bullshit, right? It rips the veneer off the bullshit propagandizing, if you want to call it that. I would just call it the advertising, but it rips the veneer off of it and exposes what's really underneath it, this web of corruption, right? That underpins these large super social structures. But if you take it at the lens of the ideology, by taking those bribes and picking and choosing winners instead of having a society for all's participation, you violated the social contract. You have to be punished for that. The severity of which in this case rises to permanent removal from society in the form of a death sentence, which is to be served as some sort of imprisonment, if I remember correctly. It's all in how you want to read that situation. If you're a liberal, it's just, they're just punishing a mayor by death. They're being too harsh for the crime of taking political bribes because it's legal here. That underpins this system. So he didn't do anything wrong. So that seems like a harsh punishment. If you're Chinese, yeah, fuck that guy. Fuck him.
And his couch.
Where I fall, I think they made a good decision.
Better than not doing anything about it.
Yeah, it's better than leaving it go unchecked and de facto legalizing it like they do here.
Yeah.
You know, even if it is all the even
My complaint wasn't with the punishment. That
Yours
was
is
just
how
me
they
being
word it.
pedantic and ridiculous. It was just the nomenclature.
Right. Yours is the pedantic game. Well, just say your life imprisoning the guy for his crimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I see what you're driving at. That's fine. That's why I'm not like, oh, Jenk is, I get it.
You're not accusing me of being a pro
pro money in
pedophilia,
politics.
pro bribery.
I would accuse you of accidentally tripping into the argument. I would never accuse you of that being an essential quality of you. It's just like earlier when I said, can we stay at the conclusion that they're just evil? Well, we tripped into genocide. We're going to walk that one back, aren't we? Same thing. If we trip into the argument, we know we need to walk something back and rethink it. I don't think it is an essential quality of you at all. Quite the opposite. I think if I gave you a crowbar to pedophile and a carte blanche check to do something, I'm going to have to clean up a bloody mess afterwards. That's
Probably.
I think you're a good guy.
Do I have to use the crowbar?
I mean, I'm going to give you a crowbar, however you do it.
I mean, get creative.
Get creative. I don't give a shit. It's a pedophile. Fuck it.
Don't worry. I understand the assignment.
Yeah. Well, all I'm saying is that afterwards, I give you 10 minutes, I'm going to have to clean a lot of mess up. You know what I mean?
No. Okay. 10 minutes isn't a lot of time. I'm probably using the crowbar.
I think you're strong enough and clever enough. You'll get it done in 10 minutes. I have faith in you. See, that's how much I think you're a good person. I have a lot of faith in you.
A good armbar would do it in 4.
Exactly. But yeah, you're right. In Mexico, they kill you if you don't participate in the corruption. In the U.S., we just skip the problem by legalizing the corruption. That's the difference between the two countries. Chat firing off bombs again. I love chat. Love this viewer. What's it been? 2 hours? I think next time.
That was fast.
It did go pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
Tonight it did. I think, if you guys aren't opposed, to help round this one out, I think we're going to explore more on the bodies with organs again and see if that's actually viable. We're going to stress test that one as an alternative notion to free will. Or at the very least, a new interpretation. We'll start playing some thought experiments with that and we'll start thinking it through. How's that sound?
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, better than nothing.
Listen, we've milked a lot of weeks out of this, and I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. Got a lot of juicy evergreen content out of this one, John.
Yep.
That's what you love. That's what you crave. All right. So this has been
a pine tree.
Yeah, like a pine tree, evergreen.
Or an IPA.
So again, I'm Dan Cohen, Dr. Dan, the metaphysician from Pennsylvania.
Madan?
Stan.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't make that one work. New homework assignment. New rhyming intro and outro. I was joined by John Sinclair.
Yes, sir.
And Michael Jordan Peterson.
Hey. What's up, guys?
Jank Engels.
Night, America.
True will be back one day. He's been currently operating with the BISIS players, the Bisexual ISIS Theater Troupe.
Yeah, they told me they didn't like me anymore.
Well,
apparently True's really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I didn't know he had 15 tentacle arms. No one told me.
It's weird. Wait,
it does make it easier.
It's past Halloween. We got to do something for Thanksgiving and maybe.
Well, he is the true horror.
He is the true horror. He's truly horrible. Ah! Zinged his ass.
Zinged his ass. He's not even here to defend himself.
I know,
Get burnt.
That's when the attacks are launched. I fully expect you all to make fun of me when I'm not here. Oh, look, I'm fucking.
We do it when you're here.
I'm so smart. I'm a fucking metaphysician. I go on long-winded fucking rants about libertarians every 2 fucking minutes. If you can't make fun of yourself, who can you make fun of? Well, pedophiles. True. You can always make fun of pedophiles. Greasy fucks. Good night. Love you.